Our first one, we're starting off here, nice and hot, Idaho Republican Caucus, a closed door to the media. This comes by several sources. On March 22nd, Idaho's Republican Party will conduct its first presidential caucus in over a decade, a significant event that marks the state's desire to be an early influencer in the presidential selection process. However, the caucus comes with a notable change, the exclusion of media from caucus locations. This decision has sparked a debate about transparency, election integrity, and the role of media in political processes. The Idaho Republican Party's decision to hold a caucus this year stems from a legislative oversight that eliminated the March primary elections. The caucus, restricted to registered Republicans, will take place across 210 locations statewide. The party's executive director, Kira Turnbow, stated that the exclusion of the media aims to protect election integrity and ensure that only registered Republicans can cast their ballots. However, this rationale has not quelled concerns. Instead, it has raised questions about the GOP's commitment to transparency. Political scientists and journalists have criticized the decision to bar media access, labeling it as undemocratic and abnormal. Leaders from Idaho for Openness in Government and the Idaho Press Club have voiced their disapproval, arguing that this move undermines public trust and makes it more difficult to inform the public about a high-interest event. Despite these criticisms, the Idaho Republican Party plans to allow media access to its downtown Boise headquarters when announcing the results. Although logistics are still being determined, this compromise doesn't address the broad concerns about openness and accountability in the caucus process. As Idaho prepares for its presidential caucus, the debate over media exclusion underscores a tension between the desire for election integrity and the need for transparency in a democratic process. The decision has implications not only for the relation between the Republican Party and the media, but also for public trust in the electoral system. So, when I was researching this, I will very much admit I kind of flip-flop my sides on this because, you've got the media side of it and perspective, which obviously they're the ones that have the quill a lot of the time. And so they have a certain perspective on it and vice versa, the perspective from the Republican Party. But never let it be said here in the show that we don't try to be at least impartial or give a hand to each view. So I guess just a little bit of context I would like to jump into first as we're going into this. It's not a common practice from when I was researching for media not to be let into the caucus locations, but it is very, very common for the media not to be allowed in a voting area. So if you guys have ever gone vote, the presidential elections, I think is the most common one people remember. There's usually the building you go into and there's like a lobby or an area where you're walking into and people are meeting there and talking your different things. And then there's the actual room where the voting is happening. That I did find a lot of evidence of that area not allowing for media into the voting area, but the common area, which from the people I've talked to and the research I was able to do, I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, please comment on this, and I would love to see your source. But I couldn't find anything to say that the media were allowed in there, but it was just they were fully barred, that like they had to stand outside the building and they couldn't be in, and that was the position that the Republican Party was taking on it.
Which that makes sense, I guess, if you're going to say that as a voting place, you don't let the press in. Then if you're saying that at your caucus you are voting, then you don't let the press in. I guess that makes sense. Frankly, the Republican Party, and I think I've said this before, the Republican Party is a private organization. They can do what they want. Whether they let the press in or not is up to them. It may look better or worse one way or the other, but I don't think they should really care too much about the optics. The Republican Party isn't going anywhere, especially here in Idaho. Where they might care about the optics is if things get a little crazy or they make decisions that are really wonky, but I don't know. Something tells me that coming out of this caucus, we're having Trump
not
be
term
the
in too much
nominee.
That we don't already know.
Yeah, so I don't know. I guess the issue is now you're setting precedent that we don't let media into Republican events. But then again, the media hasn't been kind to Republicans anyway. So as a Republican group, I'm sure you would just tell the media to go jump in a lake because they're not your friends anyway. So,
right.
Okay.
And I mean, you're like, okay, yep, that's Idaho. Yep. And I mean, kind of springboarding off something you said there and to kind of compare and contrast. Obviously, as you touched on, there is a very large amount of distrust for the media. And I would argue it comes from an understandable place, right? that the media lately is not the friend of a conservative, more the enemy, that it regularly likes to twist words and bend them the way that it wants them to be done rather than what they were, which is not good at all. And I think it's a warranted distrust, a warranted wariness of the media, right? But then you have the other flip side of it, which is that I would argue, and I agree with this position, the media should be there and should be used in society. It has a place to keep people accountable, and especially our elected people. Obviously, the populace should be doing that, but not all of us can be on Capitol Hill every day, right? And so that's why, for example, here with Local Yokel Idaho, Idaho Freedom Foundation, other ones, right, I think are trying to step up to the plate to fill that gap. But the media, or the news as a whole, that is our job, is to take that information, report it so that people can be kept accountable and the light can be shown on things and it doesn't get hidden. So you have these two sides, and I think both of them are very warranted in the way it's going. The Idaho Republican Party is being protective, we'll put it that way. And I see the warranted part of it, but there's another part of it that I will admit I am a little bit more wary on. I obviously vote Republican, I'm conservative, and so when I'm saying I'm not a traitor or something, but I'm you can't be right all the time. And so with that said, I would say let the media into the foreground area. Obviously, they're going to do what the media does, right? But I don't think this is a great precedent to set. And it's just a bubbling distrust, and it doesn't look good. I personally, reading through all the arguments that the Republican Party is putting forward for why they're doing this, really don't make any sense to me and don't seem like warranted answers. The best argument I've heard, credit where credit's due, is over in the Idaho Dispatch. It's going to be in the description. You can go check that article out. It has to do with integrity. But the best argument I heard is privacy, that you want people to be private, not pushed on what they're going to vote and how they're going to vote, right? And all these different things, which I think that's a fairish argument, but I feel like if the press isn't allowed into the voting room, I just don't like that precedent that sets. This trend with the Republican Party in the state of Idaho is concerning, I would say, with the dislike of cameras and recording things, which are kind of a really good form of accountability.
Yeah, well, and here we might have a fundamental difference of opinion, because one thing you said is you like the Republican Party. I personally can't stand the Republican Party.
Okay.
There are good people in the Republican Party. I'll say that first. But it's also, and maybe more national, and I don't know the local party as well, but the Republican Party is full of a bunch of snakes in the grass. And the Republican Party hasn't done anything to get rid of those snakes. And so the Republican Party, in my mind, as a party, has already lost all credibility. And I don't look at them as being an open and honest organization in the way that they've done things on the federal level and at the state level in terms of which candidates they run, who they back, who they've ousted recently in the House. Things in the Republican Party are really weird and really goofy, and it's not great. So when it comes to something like this,
it doesn't shock you.
I mean, no, it doesn't shock me that the Republican Party doesn't want to air their dirty laundry, because it's really dirty. And, if you're a fan of the Republican Party, you might not like me for having that opinion, and that's great. You can have your opinions. I hope you allow me to have them too. But I can't say that I've seen the Republican Party as a party, not individuals, but as a party, ever do anything that would make me desire to respect them as an organization.
I mean, it's a fair position. The two political parties in America, the big ones, Democrat and Republican, they're not great. They aren't.
Nope.
And at the end of the day, I think most of the time we're choosing between better of two evils, right? And the Republican Party, I think, has a little bit of a better backbone in some areas than the Democrat Party, and obviously the founding ideals in any case, right?
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
In the platform. Now, the execution of that, I think there's a lot of problems with it, and it's not great.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people in a recent thing, which I'm not going to go into right now publicly on the show, in Idaho have kind of stepped away from certain areas of the Republican Party due to frustration and kind of that dirty laundry you're talking about, right? And I think that's fully warranted. But my perspective anyways on it is that if there's something that you think is good that you want to be good, shall we say. I think the Republican Party could do some really amazing good. Then I would say you should fight for it and you should go and try to change it. And so with the Republican Party, my argument would be the reason the Republican Party it is, and both parties for that matter are the way they are, is for a lack of local involvement in them.
Yep.
They are structured in such a way that you can have a profound impact on your Republican and Democratic Party. Well, at least the Republican. I don't know much about the Democrat, but I would hope so, at a local level. And if you really think it's sleazebally, then I feel like that should call you, and I would encourage you to then get involved then. Don't just sit there and say, it's bad, it's horrible, blah, 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 blah. We'll have a solution. I would encourage you and challenge you to get involved and try to make that not the case.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. The first part of that whole conversation, I would say, is pay attention to the world around you and get to know things.
Anywho, coming back to, I guess, the grounding of the story, the Republican Party's kind of doing some interesting things there that I don't think, they're iffy, but something to be aware of, and maybe reach out to your Republican representative in the party.